OpenAI has announced 12 Days of OpenAI.
That CFPB Director Rohit Chopra say that AI could be the key to more fair credit scoring system.
Amazon announced this week Nova family of foundational models. Commonwealth Bank of Australia have recently delivered some impressive statistics about their results.
Tencent just released a video generation model.
Feifei released an AI system that can transform the image into an explorable 3D world.
Spotify partnered with Google's Notebook LM, Wrapped. Welcome back to What the AI, where we decode the latest developments in artificial intelligence for busy professionals. I'm Jeff Keltner.
And I'm Annie Delgado.
Annie, how was your Thanksgiving?
It was great. Thanksgiving was good. Now we're in full Christmas mode. Pretty excited. I'm getting my Christmas tree today.
You're getting the tree. So we cheated and put up the Christmas tree before Thanksgiving because I was just so much in the spirit. We couldn't wait. This is the first year we've done it, but you're going out today for the tree?
Going out today for the tree. That's controversial. I have this debate with myself every year because I definitely would be pro starting Christmas tree season earlier, but then you have to concede to the fake tree. And I'm still very much need a real tree kind of
You're a
person.
real tree person.
Yeah. I always go get a real tree. I love the smell. It smells so good. It makes your house smell good. And I don't know. I can't do the artificial tree.
We've had an artificial tree for years. We now have two because the one got so old and tattered that we bought a new one, but we didn't want to get rid of the old ones. We had to find places for two trees in the house. And we made a big deal of it with the kids when it was the last real tree. Like we went out, we cut it down, we brought it in. Like, this is the last time because we always order the tree in the post-Christmas discount sale for
Yes.
trees. So, but this year we're, going to spend a little time in New York around the holidays. And so we're missing part of the Christmas season. And we use that as justification to go before Thanksgiving for the tree and decorations because we just enjoy them.
Seems legit. And also, going to New York in the holiday season is amazing. It's so beautiful there. So you guys are going to have a great time.
It's going to be a good time.
Yeah. Well, who else is getting in the holiday spirit apparently is OpenAI. OpenAI has announced that they're holding a 12 Days of OpenAI instead of 12 Days of Christmas with new gift announcements for us every day. I don't know. I don't know if they really have 12 days of interesting product to launch. I'm curious to see. We only have a couple of days so far, but I don't know what else is coming.
I don't know what's coming. There's some rumors. We'll talk about some of the first stuff. I think it was The Verge nicknamed it the 12 Days of Shipmas. And I like, I'm agree with you. I think some of these may be not really announcements in the traditional sense, like full, but I love the emphasis on getting stuff out the door, getting stuff in people's hands, and trying it. So we'll have to see how that goes, but it'll be fun to watch for 12. Every day I'm opening up my Twitter feed and going, because often they don't even they blog it. They just put a Twitter video up of some new demo. So I was like, all right, every day I got to open Twitter, see what gift is OpenAI giving me today.
That's right. Well, yesterday's, I have to admit, was definitely a gift for me because it was a pretty long paper about how they are, making their models more safe and debiased. And so it was definitely a little gift for me yesterday. I enjoyed it a lot.
I didn't see that paper. You'll have to send that one to me.
I'll send it over. Yeah, it was very good.
To talk about that. Any interesting tidbits on how they're thinking about safety or debiasing coming out of that paper, or just?
Well, a lot of things that sort of you would expect, but really what I like to see is sort of their scorecard of what are the dimensions that they're scoring their models on, and then what would be a score that would be unable to further develop this model versus a ready for production sort of safe model to ship, and how they think about that. So I think I generally love the level of transparency that we're getting from them on these types of oversight questions, because I think that for a lot of people, that's top of mind of, how are these things working and are there risks that I'm going to see? There's a whole section in there about, fairness and debiasing the model, which I found really interesting. Obviously, I think about that a lot in the context of the work I do at Upstart. So seeing how they're thinking about it was useful, and some of the metrics that they've developed to answer, what really becomes really hard questions about accuracy versus, potential for reinforcing stereotypes and that type of stuff. And obviously there's just a whole bunch of risk in their model that could come on both sides, right? Because they're going to generate content, and if they're trying too hard to make it totally stereotype free, they can go into a lack of accuracy problem. I think you and I were talking one time about hallucinating Nazis of different
It was
racial backgrounds and stuff.
Yeah. The Gemini images where they were Asian Nazis and white Nazis, and you just went, that's not what it was. Like soldiers in Germany in the 30s weren't Asian, and they had black US senators in the 1800s. And you go, that's, I understand where they're trying to get to with a more representative set of answers, but it's also not an accurate answer to the question of like, what did US
Right.
senators look like in the 1800s? They looked a certain way.
Yeah, so I liked how they're sort of, framing how they're answering those types of questions and thinking about that accuracy versus, not reinforcing stereotypes or having, dangerous, biases out there, so it was an interesting paper to read, and if you don't wanna read it, you can upload it to ChatGPT, have it summarize for you, and ask it questions, so that's a hack if you don't wanna read the, 70 plus pages that they put out.
All right, there's a good hack. I want to ask, I'm going to take us out of order here, but there was also some discussion in this kind of guardrails on the model accuracy about certain names that ChatGPT wouldn't mention. The one I remember saw was David Meyer, and it was not really clear what happened. Do you know what's going on with that, and how do you think about this kind of issue?
I don't know what happened, and I don't think they've said what happened, so I think it's unclear, but there's some speculation that it was related to the EU rules around privacy, and there's a standard that people should be able to be forgettable. So you should be able to ask that your data and information be removed from the system. So there was some speculation that maybe this particular name was removed because somebody had asked to be removed from the system, and that's why it was the system would not say this name. There's also speculation that it was, much more exciting conspiracy theories about who this person might be and why they're being protected and all that kind of stuff. And frankly, that's a little bit more interesting than the privacy thing. But the privacy question actually is really fascinating because the data sets that feed these large models are so complex. And so even this concept of the right to be forgotten seems
How do you even do that?
nearly impossible, right? Like, how do you
Yeah.
truly forget? Forgetting a name is one thing, but all of the things associated with you, do you really have the right to be forgotten? And should you have the right to be forgotten? I think is like another question that is an interesting question. I don't know. Different people have different bars on their right to privacy, but there's some things that having information public is really for the common good to have that information to learn from things and so it's interesting this requirement or standard in the EU of the right to be forgotten. And I think there's a lot of states in the United States that have a similar type of ambition that you can just request that all of your data be deleted. And there might be some use cases where that makes sense, but there's also use cases where I think it makes sense not to do that. So
Yeah, there's definitely examples in the EU of like politicians who had unfavorable stories written about them that were not inaccurate but weren't flattering, and they wanted those stories to be forgotten, as I imagine many people would. But I'm not sure it's in the public interest to do that. It's a very difficult discussion, and not just what should you do, but then how do you actually go about doing that without how can you actually make the tools and the internet forget something that was out there? That's a very hard thing to do. I think.
it is impossible, and how does it even fit with frameworks like our, right to free press? And if you're a politician, like you said, who's done something bad and the public has a right to know about that, do you also have the right to be like, "Well, I'd like everyone to forget about that, so just delete me from ChatGPT, please?" I don't know how I would feel about that.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, interesting. Well, ChatGPT or OpenAI specifically had a lot of updates this week.
They kept going with all the days of shipments, didn't they?
They just really kept going. Yeah, 12 days of shipments was only the beginning. So tell us about this, what is the new word? Superintelligence.
Super
Superintelligence.
intelligent. Well, so a lot of this, they announced the 12 days of shipments, I think, at the New York Times Deal Book Summit, and Sam Altman was there talking, and he dropped a bunch of facts. One, 300 million weekly ChatGPT users, which was kind of crazy. But then he made this really fascinating statement. I'm going to quote here so we get it right. My guess is we will hit AGI sooner than most people in the world think, and it will matter much less, which was kind of crazy to me. And they've been talking about the importance of AGI forever, and it felt like he was just kind of moving the goalposts, going, well, I mean, AGI is kind of like it's going to happen, and it's not a big deal. And then he started talking about super intelligence, which is really where all the safety and where all the regulation should be focused, and the safety concerns about the super intelligence, the singularity, maybe is what Ray Kurzweil would call it. And I was just like, what's he doing? Like, we're gonna get there really fast, and then we're gonna move about super intelligence. That's really, I felt like a total change of the tone and tenor of what AGI is and means to the world to do that. It was really fascinating.
I know. Well, maybe Sam Altman is a listener of the podcast because I remember a couple weeks ago you saying, "I don't really think that, the AGI is that important," and so it was interesting for him to say also the same thing. But the other thing you mentioned a couple weeks ago that I'm curious your take on when I read this is that just like for a long time, the term machine learning or the term AI was sort of like a nebulous moving definition. And then now the AGI is a nebulous moving definition. And now we have this new thing to define about super intelligence, which is going to be a nebulous moving definition. So, how are you how do you think about sort of categorizing these things simply in your mind, or do you think about it, or are you just watching the tides?
I don't find it critical to categorize them that way in my mind. It's more important to me to understand what people mean when they say something like that. Because I would argue we have narrow versions of AI superintelligence today. There are models that are far smarter at specific tasks than humans are. So is that superintelligence? I don't know. And then, artificial general intelligence is this pretty amorphous concept. In ways you see like really close, like AI models, ChatGPT included, are way smarter than people on average in certain areas. And they do really stupid things like miscount the number of R's in strawberry. And you go, well, do I care if they're better at like almost all academic subjects than us, but can't count R's? Like, does that count? It just kind of seems like a dorm room, 3 a.m. college student kind of debate. It doesn't really matter. Um, I think when Sam talks about superintelligence, he is talking about what Ray Kurzweil called the singularity in many ways, or what people talk about like the takeoff point, where the model becomes so smart it can make itself smarter at a sort of an exponential growth curve where it's like it gets smart enough to increase its capability faster than we could. And as it increases its capability, it gets faster at increasing its capability and so on and so forth. And you get this kind of like exponential curve of intelligence that then, Terminator style Skynet becomes self-aware on April, whatever it is, and, decides to wipe out humanity. And that feels like we're a long ways off and nobody really knows if we'll get there. And everything in between here and there, for me, a lot of it feels like this, technology. It was an old Alan Kay quote, I think. Technology is anything invented after you were born. Like everything just becomes, oh, like everything that used to be AI is not, that's just machine learning because we kind of understand it and it feels normal. And I think it's the same thing is true for AGI. We're going to keep, well, that's not AGI. That's just normal AI. Or that's just machine learning. It's fine. Like we've been doing that for your image recognition or whatever. Just kind of that definition shifts to mean whatever we don't fully understand or aren't comfortable with yet. And it's kind of meaningless.
I feel like it does kind of feel like that's exactly what happened with this, with Sam Altman's definitions, right? Is like he's become so comfortable with whatever their models have gotten to that now he's like, well, that's not even the scary part. It's the next thing that we don't understand yet because it doesn't. It feels a little bit like a moving of the goalpost because for a long time, what we were hearing from OpenAI is that the arrival of AGI was gonna be, like, the big milestone moment for humanity, and now we have, Sam Altman saying, "Well, it's gonna be here pretty soon, and it's not gonna be as much of a milestone as we all thought, and actually, there's some point in the future that's a much more significant milestone."
For sure. I think the other thing to keep in mind with this, and I'm not an expert on this area, but there were parts of the OpenAI Microsoft contract that gave Microsoft some sort of rights to the model up to the point of achieving AGI. And then there was a shift in the nature of the relationship where, Microsoft did not have rights. There were certain things that disappeared at that point. And so there is a little bit whereas as they're shifting OpenAI to a for-profit model, there's some incentive for them to declare the AGI milestone to have been achieved earlier rather than later because it gives them, I think, a little more flexibility in how they think about their commercial relationships moving forward versus what Microsoft, what their rights are based on the previous investment. So another little, I don't want to call it conspiratorial, but a different incentive set for Sam and OpenAI in terms of when they put that AGI mark on the ground and say, yeah, we've achieved AGI now, because it gives them some more business flexibility.
Well, that's fascinating. I wonder if that is I'm assuming it's a defined term in their contract. I would love to be privy to that.
I don't think that one's been part of their transparency efforts.
Yeah.
Uh, but the last piece of news from OpenAI, the first 12 days of OpenAI shipments launch was a pro version of ChatGPT. So I guess I pay $20 a month for the plus version. Now there's a pro version. You can have it. It's yours for the bottom of the barrel price of $200 a month. It includes unlimited access to the 4.0 model, unlimited access to the O1 model, unlimited access to the advanced voice model, none of which I've ever had a limit on personally, so it doesn't seem that value. along with a O1 Pro model, that's the model that they can throw more compute at answer time to give better answers, make it think harder, so to speak. And it will give you a more thoughtful answer. It will think harder on your questions for just $200 a month. So, there you go. First OpenAI feature, affordable for every man and woman in the country.
I had tremendous sticker shock at the price. I couldn't even believe, like, who's paying $200 a month? I mean, the beauty of ChatGPT was, like, everyone was gonna pay $20 a month for that sort of functionality, but 200? Like, that has to be a significant, uh, value add, and I don't it's not clear to me, it thinks harder. Okay, what does that mean? How does that translate into that much more value for me when it thinks harder? I am not sure, like, are people paying that price point using it for totally different use cases? Or I mean, they say that, like, the most common use case for ChatGPT right now is, like, homework help, right? So, like,
Well, it killed
I don't
Chegg, right? I mean, Chegg,
yeah.
the textbook company that had a homework help thing, like, values plummeted, and they attribute a lot of it to ChatGPT becoming the homework helper. Yeah, that seemed stunning to me. Just such a high price. I mean, you don't usually put out a premium version that's 10x your standard version right away. And I didn't quite get it. I've played with the new. I guess they took the preview off of the O1, and it's a more thoughtful model. So I went in and tried stuff. And the only use case I've seen so far is social media influencers who are they're posting. I paid $200. What do you want me to ask it? And they're trying to get enough views to get ad revenue of more than $200 to justify the payment, which is fine, but it's not a very broad business use case. I have not gone down that path. And I guess I've seen a bunch of people frustrated. They ask it like, give me an idea for a business with infinite growth. And it's like, doesn't come up, or help me solve, give me the 5 steps to solve climate change. And it doesn't solve climate change in 5 steps. And they go, what is this? It
I
didn't work.
I
Like,
paid $200 a month and it didn't solve climate
yeah,
change?
right. $200 a month. And it can't even
Mm.
answer, how do you solve climate change in peace in the Middle East? I mean, what are we paying for? So I don't know. It was, I don't see that. It does make me wonder if if they're relying on that kind of price point to reach profitability, because that would be concerning to me. They're still burning more money training these models than they make even at $20 a month. So it's a real question of like, it does make you wonder, do they need you to start paying something closer to $200 a month to make a profit? And if so, that's a tough sale to me, that's a profitable approach.
That's a tough sale, but one thing you mentioned earlier that we sort of glazed over was, Sam Altman announcing that they have 300 million users, which I think the last time they announced their metric was in August, and they only had 200 million users. So that's a huge growth in a pretty short period of time. And I don't know if he clarified, how many of those were paying users versus the free functionality users, but that there's a tremendous growth in user adoption of the
Sure.
software. And I don't think they're gonna see that type of growth on a $200 a month subscription model.
Maybe they did taken a little, behavioral economics course, and they realize if you put $200 a month out there, that $100 a month or $20 a month sounds pretty good. And if you put out a $40 a month subscription, you go, "Ah, so much cheaper than the $200. That's a good value. I'm gonna grab this." Maybe they're playing a little psychological game with everybody to convince them that $20 a month is actually a screaming good deal for the plus version and not really expecting people to buy the pro. I don't know. But I was certainly, for the first announcement on the 12 days of shipments, I thought $200 a month for ChatGPT Pro was a bit of a big swing.
Yeah, yeah, big swing. Well, we talked a lot about OpenAI. There was so much this week about OpenAI. We could have probably done the whole episode just on them, but let's not leave out Amazon. Amazon announced this week a Nova family of foundational models. They announced it at the AWS Invent conference in Vegas, and there's obviously going to be more to come on this. But the initial set has text generative models, and it also has video generation models that are going to be incorporated into different tools that their customers can use. There's actually some pretty good videos up on their website with sort of examples of how these things work. But this is pretty interesting to see. And no one really, Amazon will see if they take the lead in foundation models, but nobody's really come out as the front runner there yet. So we'll see how it goes.
It was interesting. I mean, it appeared that at least their text generation model, Nova, they had, like, as everybody now, they had like the small, cheap one and the medium sized, pretty good one, and the expensive, really big, most best in class model. And the best in class seemed to be kind of on par on the various metrics with GPT-4 or Gemini Pro 1.5, the latest models from, OpenAI and Google and Anthropic. So, it really makes you wonder if there is a sustainable advantage in the capability of the model, if that's really what's going to help somebody differentiate, or if, we're going to end up with 6 or 7 players who all have really good model. I'm sure there'll be, this one's a little better at this one's a little better at this, but if we're really going to have not a commodity, but a a set of choices of roughly equivalent models from different players that you'll have access to, which obviously changes the value equation and how much you can charge people for access to those models.
Yeah, well, and I think Amazon, I mean, they have a huge, advantage as long as their model is as good as everyone else's, they have a huge advantage in just the sheer number of customers that they have, and so if they can integrate it into what customers are already using the Amazon suite for, why would they go and try to integrate with some other thing that they then have to plug in if they just have an as good of a model right in the tool that they're already using, right? So, like, advertisers on Amazon can just generate a video to advertise their product. That's really creative. Why am I gonna go to a separate ad agency or, video agency to produce something when it's just integrated right into the system I'm using? So I think they have actually a pretty good, compelling advantage for certain use cases.
Yeah, I imagine part of that too is for developers. Like if you believe, and I do believe that much of the value for AI models will not be just the chatbot direct consumer interaction with the model, but people layering it into various applications that they build as a way you interface with whatever app you're building or ask questions or whatever. And then if you're building on top of AWS, which by the way, many companies do,
Right.
then don't you just want to get the AWS model that's built in and optimized to run on Amazon's infrastructure and cheaper and your data's already there to be trained on and do all that. Like I think there's a tremendous advantage in the B2B space as a back-end model API business for Amazon. I mean, there are definitely businesses built around non-technical moats, and distribution and integration in existing customer base are tremendous moats. So it would not surprise me to see Amazon. This is what Microsoft's trying to do, right, with the Azure of the models that they support. But this is a pretty strong play for Amazon. I'd be pretty bullish on their ability to take a lot of developer share, and as you see AI integrated into various applications and services, that a lot of that may be powered by Amazon Nova models.
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see, but I agree with you. I'm pretty bullish on Amazon.
Yeah, I don't buy stocks individually, but I would, I'd be shorting $200 price point for ChatGPT, and I'd be buying long Amazon Nova integrated into AWS services.
All right. Well, look, our podcast just became investment advice as well.
No investment advice. Don't
Oh,
don't don't bring my investment advice. I definitely don't do that. Uh,
okay.
while we're on the topic of new model releases, another interesting model release, Chinese company Tencent just released a video generation model that received higher ratings on some scores than RunwayML's latest Gen 3 and Luma, and some of the other Chinese models. And it's open source and small enough to run on a laptop. They're probably not mine. I don't have a very powerful laptop, but to run a laptop. So that was an interesting announcement and release to see that out there from a Chinese company, image generation on a laptop, not such a big model.
Yeah, and also, the increase in releases and launches that we're seeing about video generation, which I think is really cool because we talked a couple weeks ago, like, historically, generating a video is very time intensive, expensive, and these guys are getting pretty good at generating custom videos in a short period of time here.
Yeah, the video, I mean, I feel like we all had the ChatGPT moment where the text models went from kinda meh to like, wow, that's really good. And I feel like we're kind of at that moment for video where the video you were getting a year ago was kind of like, I mean, it's impressive that a computer can make that from scratch, but it's like it's not going to be doing anything for anybody. And now they're like really impressive. They're still short and there's issues, but like the rate of advancement there is kind of unbelievable, and they're getting really good really fast. So I think there'll be a lot of interesting use cases for these models, and interesting to see coming out of China and open source for that kind of model.
For sure, for sure, and I mean, obviously, I think marketing is a big use case here. I'd love,
Mm.
we've talked before about AI powering smaller businesses and bringing, sort of faster advancements to companies with smaller, or less deep pocketbooks, but so marketing is a big use case, but I would love to see, custom video content for other cases too, training and so on and so forth. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for people to, like, learn differently because of AI models, right? You can learn differently when you can we like to consume things in small bite-sized pieces. We were just talking about our podcast viewers. A lot of them like to watch the short videos more than the whole long video, right? People like to consume things in small snippets. So, that these video announcements, I think, is really interesting to see transpire.
Yeah, it's a great point, and the kind of the thing we've come back to many times, which is it's not that we're going to replace current video production necessarily with these tools, but we'll start to say, hey, where can we not produce video today that would be really useful to produce video? And how does this enable us to kind of a new set of companies to actually have video assets, or a new set of use cases that wouldn't have been able to afford video production to have a set of good looking video assets and unlock a whole bunch of creativity. The other thing that this model release makes me think of is that while we're, the tech space is interesting because we've seen a lot of, I'll say, slowing down of the advancement at the state of the art, right? Like that, it doesn't seem to be moving as fast as it was a year or two ago. And I imagine we'll hit that point with video. But what does seem to happen is the complexity required to achieve that level of performance just seems to drop, right? We put out the GPT-4 and then it's like, oh, now we've got the like half the size model that's 95% as good and it'll run on a laptop and it'll run cheap. And so that this was, running on a laptop, not that high power. I think another great example of I expect the almost state of the art, the cost to actually, the cost to train, but then really the cost at inference to really keep dropping where you'll see, state of the art will advance, but your ability to access at a low cost, almost as good models is going to be just kind of unbelievable. And we'll continue to see the efficiency increase maybe faster than we see the state of the art improve.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. More video news on the topic of video models. The godmother of AI, Fei Li, she is a founder of the startup World Labs, and they also released some video functionality. Their first major project, actually, released this week. It's an AI system that takes images and can transform the image into an explorable sort of 3D world. Similar to what you said in the last comment, the video doesn't go too far, right? Like, you can't get super far into the world, but it is kinda cool to see that it can take a 2D image and transform it into a 3D sort of interactive space. I liked, clicking around on their demo videos and seeing this. It seemed pretty cool to me. Did you take a look?
I did. I explored. They got a couple of different. I mean, they're all kind of like I don't want to say cartoonish, but in that kind of style
Yeah.
worlds, and they were really fun. And you couldn't walk very far. I was kind of like, oh, I get to walk around, and then I like little blue things would flash on the side. You can't walk any far. Like I haven't walked that far yet. But I'm sure those restrictions will be removed. But it was pretty cool. And certainly when we talk about video games or what's going on in Minecraft and the ability to, especially because these were, I think, mostly worlds generated from AI generated images, and so you were using a text-based prompt, a description of a world you wanted to create an image. I think they used ImageN, if I remember right, in the Google's image generation model. And then those models were fed into this 3D world creator. So now you can create a 3D world just from a text-based prompt of what you'd like to see, which is pretty cool. And when you start to think about uh, gaming or educational use cases and being able to walk through experiences, it's a pretty exciting thing to see that going on. I'm excited to play it. If you haven't played with it, just World Labs. It's on their blog, so it's not on their homepage. But if you look at the blog, you can go and look around a couple of virtual worlds. It's very cool.
Talk to me more about the educational use cases of sort of where you see is this more like we talked a couple weeks ago about the sort of simulated environments to train different, robots training in a simulated environment. Could this type of use case be valuable in that context as well in terms of putting together sort of virtual worlds for training environments and this type of thing?
I think both for training models or robots, I think you could certainly creating worlds and scenarios and experiences that you wanted to train on or explore is really interesting. And I think maybe that's where some of the most interesting stuff is going to happen over the next handful of years. Is not just the models iterating, but like how do I plug this AI system in with this AI system and let them interact and build upon each other and explore the outlines. I also think just like these immersive worlds are so compelling to our kids. So outside of training an AI model or training a robotic system, just my kids, I don't know about your kid, like Minecraft, Fortnite, whatever it is, this kind of it doesn't have to be hyper realistic, but the interactive nature of exploring and checking things out. And one of the things that World Labs is doing is trying to build, physics engines where you can have realistic or non-realistic, but it's trying to actually replicate the way the world would work. And as you do that, the idea of learning science through virtual environments or, learning history by walking through actual experiences or play, like, those things are really compelling. And the cost to produce is so high for that kind of stuff now. But you can imagine that coming down. So I just think that there's such compelling content that you can create for learners, whether they're virtual AI learners or actual, human learners, kids or adults, is a really interesting opportunity.
I love that, and I mean, again, broken record on the sort of ability to democratize knowledge using AI, but think about all the kids who don't get to go to the outdoor ed that we talked about, right? Where you get to go and have those hands-on experiences or maybe don't get to travel as much, right? Because they come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And so having these types of environments where kids can have hands-on science experience that's not maybe like physical hands-on, but feels very hands-on and you still can learn about these worlds that are not just right in your backyard. I just think that that would be a huge opportunity for the world if more kids had access to this type of stuff.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, while we're on the topic of broken records or not broken records and kids enjoying things, one of my kids' favorite use cases of audio-based AI now is Spotify partnered with Google's Notebook LM. So I don't know if you've ever looked at the end of the year, Spotify has been for a couple of years now giving you your year wrapped, right? And it's like, how much did you listen? What did you listen to? What was your top artist? What was your top track? Well, now they fed all that into Google's Notebook LM, and you get like a 5-minute audio podcast style exploration of your year in music. It's gotten a little bit panned, I gotta say, because it just I don't know if I needed a 5-minute audio version of what my top tracks and artists were, but it was certainly an interesting exploration of how you could use AI to make an interesting product, an interesting experience for users that wasn't obvious necessarily.
Yeah, I usually, listen to music on Amazon Music, but after I saw this, I kind of am tempted to switch over to Spotify just for that reason. I have the sort of, like, free Spotify, premium, so I don't listen to it as often, and it made me laugh when I see my Wrapped because generally, like, I'll ask my Echo to play music, and usually it will default to play from Amazon Music, but if, I've already have it streaming somewhere else or one of my kids is listening to it on another device, it'll switch to Spotify, and for some reason, every time it switches to Spotify, it chooses Lenny Kravitz. So when I did my end of year Wrapped, it was like, "You are Lenny Kravitz's biggest fan," which he's great, but I'm definitely not his biggest fan, but it definitely made me laugh, and I thought, "Man, my data is biased here, and I gotta figure out how to get better data in my Wrapped next year."
Well, that's funny. I didn't have Lenny Kravitz in mind. It was a wide set of artists. I was surprised. I have 12,000 minutes listening. It said it would only put me in the top 27% of users. So I felt both like that's a lot of music people listen to, and I should listen to more. And then I think every parent struggles with the my Spotify Wrapped is half what I listen to and half what I played for my kids, or my kids get in the car and they go and like, my youngest in particular just hits the Spotify button and has to pick his spot, his track list for the ride home or whatever it is. And so it's like a little bit what I wanted and a little bit whatever my kid played. Um, but it was good. And I will say one of the interesting things from Notebook Elm, so I listened to mine, and one of my top bands for a variety of reasons was AC/DC. Got Fleetwood Mac in there. Journey was my top played song, so you judge me if you want. Little Glee throwback. But
No judgment.
it threw in interesting tidbits. This is one of the, and I don't know if this is true. I didn't research if this is true, but it said that Angus, the lead singer for AC/DC, kind of wears like a open collar shirt and a tie, right? And it said that it was a suggestion from his sister to take on the schoolboy look as a recognizable motif. And I was like, that's a kind of interesting thing that gets thrown in when you throw the stuff into Notebook LM. And then I feel like I got to go actually research if that's true or not, because it may, maybe not, maybe a hallucination, but it did add a little bit of color to not just like reading through the stats, which I thought was kind of fun. Um,
That is fun. I love that. Well, I'm excited to find out after you research whether that was true or not because that's a cool tidbit. I like that.
yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on the topic of models deployed in the wild, on a very different use case, Commonwealth Bank of Australia they've been using generative AI in a number of use cases, and they have recently delivered some pretty impressive statistics about their results using generative AI. They have, indicated that they've cut customer losses from scams in half. They've shortened the process for a mortgage pre-approval to 10 minutes, which is fairly remarkable. I mean, I don't know what the average time is in Australia, but I can tell you in the United States, it's a lot longer than 10 minutes. So that was pretty impressive. And then also indicated lower fraud by 30% and lower customer wait times on call center wait times by 40%. So by every metric,
That's
wow.
crazy. I saw this and I thought of you because, mortgages and banks and my thoughts were kind of one, like this real business value and impressive. And second, are you surprised to see like Commonwealth Bank? Like it's a bank doing this kind of, I would say, pretty forward thinking out in the front of the pack. Were you surprised to see a financial institution so far out in front of actually leveraging this stuff in a very clearly a very real customer facing way to get those kind of results?
I think that the word I would use is delighted. I'm delighted to see a bank doing it. I wish more banks would use this type of thing. I mean, at the end of the day, banks serve so many customers and we're 7.5 billion people on the planet. All of us need banking services. A lot of us don't have access to banking services, unfortunately, and in our country and also in other places in the world. But as we grow even more people, the number of bankers is not growing at the same clip as the number of people who need banking services. And so having banks embrace AI, potentially, agentic AI in the future so that people can actually have access to bank services in a safe way, I think it's so important. And a lot of banks are afraid to do it because, they're afraid of their regulators. Maybe they're really, conservative. Maybe they're huge, giant institutions and change management is a nightmare. So seeing a bank say, hey, not only are we doing this, but let me show you how broad the use case of how we're applying this stuff is and how much value we're getting. I applaud them. Definitely surprised, but mostly delighted to see this for sure.
Yeah, I was I loved seeing it. I loved that there's like a mix of front office and back office stuff here, right? Like identifying and cutting customer losses to scams, lowering fraud, kind of back office predictive models, probably transactional predictive stuff. Um, maybe, listening to calls or things like that. But then pre-approvals, customer wait times on call centers, like real customer facing. And to your, but not the most highly regulated part of what banks do. Not the most, I will say, scary place to apply AI. Like all of those are pretty reasonable. A lot of banks using AI in the fraud space or some sort of sophisticated analytics. So it felt like both, I won't say a safe, but like a good roadmap for where real business value can be had in areas that aren't the things that I think most banks are most concerned about applying newest technologies to, in like risk management or areas where they go, hey, this is like the place I'm really concerned that I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
So interesting balance.
It's true, and I think a lot of times, unfortunately, the conversation around this stuff is not balanced. I usually, when I speak on conferences or in different, forums that I have, try to bring balance to that conversation. But a lot of times, the conversation in the banking world about AI is skewed towards all of the risks, all of the things that could go wrong, and there's not enough people out there talking about the opportunities. And so, this is a very tangible and real use case about the opportunities of there's lots of consumer benefit and consumer good that can come from applying these sorts of technologies, but if banks are afraid to use them because of all of the risks that the regulators keep talking about or all of the, just fear of how the regulators are going to perceive them if they use this type of stuff, they never get that benefit, and they can't even test into whether they would get the benefit if they're afraid to do that. So I love that people are out talking about the positives.
Well, while we're talking about regulators and the positives of AI, in financial institutions, I mean, a perfect segue. I saw, and I saved this to last because I wanted to get your take on this. That CFPB director Rohit Chopra came out and said that AI could be the key to more fair credit scoring system. Which I don't know. This is your space, not as much mine, but I felt like he was saying the exact opposite just like a year or two ago. So it kind of stunned me to see that in the news.
I was also stunned. I feel like I've spent, pretty much the last 4 years, as he's been at the helm at the CFPB telling people all of these things that he's afraid of are actually very manageable risks and, you're missing the point about the value, and so to see him come out at the end and say, "You know what? These are all really manageable risks, and there's tremendous value there." I am glad that he has, come to that, point of view. I think it's a little bit overdue because, again, he's talking about specifically in this, speech that he gave specifically about credit scoring, which to your point before about the applications that this Australian bank has come out with, in credit scoring, people are still very afraid to use AI because it feels like a very consequential and high risk area. But what they're missing in the conversation is that the incumbent system that everybody's using is very biased, it's very unfair, and it's very broken. A lot of people are left out, and it's not very it's not a surgical fine tooth assessment that you get of somebody's risk. Your credit score tells you how you've behaved on credit in the past. It does not predict how you will behave on credit in the future. And so when we have these arbitrary cutoffs based on credit score, you just get the story wrong a lot of the time. And AI truly is the solve for that. AI can debias the system. It can make the system more accurate. It can make the assessment of a person's ability to repay the debt obligation a lot more sophisticated and rich. And so there's so much benefit to come from AI based credit decisioning. And for the last 4 years, what we've heard from the CFPB is to be wary of that. And so now to hear what sort of feels like a change of course to say, actually, this is the solution, is really really great to see. I'm glad he said it. Like I said, I wish he had said it earlier, but but we'll see what the industry does with that. And one thing to note, uh, in total fairness about what he said is he's not advocating necessarily for lenders to go out and all start developing their own AI. He is an advocate for a centralized, sort of government approved and overseen AI system, which is maybe not my favorite part of his suggestion, but that's sort of the idea that he's put out there.
To me, you gotta feel optimistic about the future. When it represents a recognition that I love the phrase "more fair," right? Because it's like, you can't really find an easy definition of fair just writ large. Like we've talked about this before. There are competing definitions of fair that are all seem reasonable and are mutually exclusive to achieve. And so it's not clear what exactly fair means. But at least understanding that the standard isn't some idealistic notion of fair that we can debate about, but like what is happening in the world today and how can we use these technologies to make a world that looks closer to what we might like in an idealized scenario than we have is really the bar we should be looking at and trying to apply. And to hear that from a typically skeptical regulator, I don't know, it makes me optimistic about the future. The story of Commonwealth Bank makes me optimistic about, what we can do and what the future is.
A quick word from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Upstart, the leading AI lending marketplace that connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products. Their platform includes personal loans, automated retail and refinance loans, home equity lines of credit, and small dollar relief loans. For more information, head over to www.upstart.com.
Maybe that's a good way to come into the holiday season and wrap up this week. Well, optimistic note, the bright future of AI and, several more days of 12 days of shipments. So next week, I'm sure we'll have a lot of more fun open AI stuff to talk about. But it seems like a good place to end it for this week.
That sounds great, Jeff. Yep, lots more to come next week.
All right. We'll see you next week, Annie. Thanks.
I'll see you next week. Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by Upstart. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the fundamentals of AI, check out the AI Certification for Financial Services course Upstart released at aicertification.upstart.com. Again, that's aicertification.upstart.com. If you like this episode, please leave us a rating or review. It's the best way to help others find us. And finally, if you have topics you'd like to see covered or questions you'd like to have answered, drop us a line at email@whattheai.fm. That's it. We'll see you guys next time.